As you enter the Church of the Nativity, you go through a very small door into a receiving area or entrance to the church called the narthex. But that's not the way it always was. The original church that Helena built did not have a narthex. The door just opened up to a large colonnade which is called the nave. But after the church was destroyed by the Samaritans in 529 AD, the Roman Emperor Justinian rebuilt the church, and it had 3 large majestic doors that opened up to the new ancient narthex. Now 2 of these ancient doors have been covered up by later constructions. So on the outside, all you can see is 1 door, and from here you will enter the nave. Now the nave used to have rows of pews, but now it's just empty aisles. And there are 44 polished red limestone Corinthian columns in this nave that were quarried near Bethlehem. Most of them were from the original 4th century church that Helena built. If you look up to the top of these columns, you will see that 30 of them have paintings of saints on them. 20 of these people are identified by the inscriptions below them, and they were all painted by different Crusader artists, and one painting even has a date on it, 1133 AD. Some of these are saints that are recognized only by the Catholic Church, and some are only recognized by the Byzantine Church. Just like the icons in the Orthodox churches represent saints who intercede between worshippers and God, so these columns support the belief that the saints who are painted on them are pillars in the church, and they support the church. On the right side of the nave, toward the back, is a baptismal font, and this dates from the 6th century church of Justinian. There is an inscription on it that reads, "For remembrance, rest, and remission of sins of those whose names the Lord knows." Now, while the walls of this church go back to the time of the Emperor Justinian in 565 AD, the current roof was built in the 15th century. Now, the floors that you're walking on go back to the 6th century, but there is another floor underneath it, and the floor underneath goes back to the 4th century, back to Queen Helena herself. And you can see this earlier floor by opening up one of several trapdoors. Now, this lower floor contains geometric images as well as plants and birds, and the entire nave was filled with these mosaics. You can only imagine what this church must have looked like with such a huge carpet of these intricate patterns. But one thing that you won't see on the mosaics are any human images, and that's because the Byzantines interpreted the 2nd commandment literally. You shall not make for yourself any graven image, which is exactly what all the pagan religions did. So the early church resisted this custom. Now, this mosaic that Queen Helena built had octagons all over it. And like I've said before, the number 8 and the geometric symbol of the octagon were symbols of the divinity of Jesus. 2 of these octagons are visible through the trapdoors, and one of them has a partridge in the center of it. Well, the partridge was the ancient symbol of truth, and I believe that this was Helena's way of speaking to us in code. What I think she was saying is that the divinity of Jesus is true. Another interesting part of the mosaic decoration is preserved under another trapdoor, where we can see a monogram bearing the Greek letters that spell ichthus. Now, ichthus literally means fish in Greek, but to the early Christians, this word was also an acronym for the words Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. Now, why was this beautiful wall-to-wall mosaic covered up only a couple hundred years after it was laid down? It was probably due to the destruction of the church by the Samaritans in the 6th century. And shortly after that, the Emperor Justinian laid down the floor that you are walking on now. Now, if you look at the walls near the ceiling, you will see a number of mosaics dating back to the 12th century, during the Crusader period. And when they were first built, these mosaics covered the walls of the church, but they were partly covered over with plaster some years later. However, restoration efforts in 2017 made these mosaics visible to the public once again. And in the top row, there are angels in procession to the Grotto of the Nativity. One of the most fascinating mosaics in the north transept is a picture of the Apostle Thomas inspecting the hands and the side of the resurrected Christ. Remember that Thomas is the apostle who was the first to declare that Jesus was both Lord and God, and he did so 8 days after Christ's resurrection. All of the apostles are shown in this picture with 8 pillars behind them, probably symbolizing the 8 days that Jesus had already been risen. Now yet to be discovered is the mosaic of the Magi all wearing Persian attire. We know that such a mosaic existed, and it was seen by the Persian invaders of 614 AD. And after looking at the Magi in this mosaic, the invaders decided not to destroy the Church of the Nativity. Well, the Christians started to figure things out, realizing that it was a simple mosaic that saved their entire church. So when the Muslims took over the Holy Land, the Christians decided to allow them to worship in a corner of this church, which probably helped save the church from the mad Muslim Caliph Al-Hakam in 1009 AD. Now at the very front of the nave is the main altar of the church, and this belongs to the Greek Orthodox community. This part of the church is called the presbytery. In Orthodox tradition, icons are not simple pieces of art. They are windows through which the worshiper finds true communion with God and all of those who have labored for the Christian faith. According to John 20:28, the Apostle Thomas declared Jesus to be Lord and God on the 8th day after his resurrection. So the number 8 and the geometric sign of the octagon became symbolic of the divinity of Jesus. There is another altar just to the right of the presbytery, and that is the altar of the circumcision, remembering Jesus' circumcision 8 days after his birth. On the left side of the presbytery is the Armenian altar of the Magi, who are believed to have tied up their horses nearby. And just to the left of that is the Armenian altar dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And that concludes our story of the nave of the Church of the Nativity.